morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to today's Enterprise Connect webinar, Microsoft Teams Voice-Enabled Customer Service Workflows, sponsored by Netrix and broadcast by Informa. I'm Eric Kraft with Enterprise Connect, and I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. This webinar is designed to be interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, share this webinar via social media outlets, participate in the Q&A session that takes place at the end of our presentation. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You may also download a copy of the slides via the Resources widget. At the end of the webinar, we'll ask you to complete our survey found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a minute to fill this out before leaving us today, as your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve future events. Lastly, if you're experiencing any technical problems, please click the Help widget found at the bottom of your screen or type your issue into the Q&A area, and we'll be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. So now on to the presentation, Microsoft Teams Voice-Enabled Customer Service Workflows. Discussing today's topic is going to be Brent Kelly, President and Principal Analyst at Kelcor, and Matt Feely, Vice President of Collaboration Services at Netrix. And I'll turn it over to Brent to get started.
Great. Thank you very much, Eric. It's always a pleasure to work with you and with the Informa team. And Matt, it's really good to be with you as well from Netrix. So today we're going to talk about some things related to Microsoft Teams, contact center, and so forth. I'll show you an agenda in just a moment. By way of background, for myself, I have a significant amount of industrial experience in a number of different industries. Plus, I've been an analyst in this industry for about a little over 20 years and have followed Microsoft ever since it came out with its first product about 2003. So with that as a short introduction, let me just move on to the agenda. So we're going to talk about these topics in the most of the session, and that will be, we need to review Microsoft calling plan and direct routing because that is kind of fundamental to integrating a contact center in with Microsoft Teams. And then we're going to mention 3 ways that you can integrate these contact centers in. Then we're going to talk about some notifications, even some way to do SMS from the Teams interface and so forth. I'll cover those topics, and then Matt from Netrix is going to be covering a few topics such as some of the robust video that his company provides, some security overlay services, as well as some deep integration capabilities that Netrix has with Microsoft Teams. So as we get started, one of the first questions we probably need to ask ourselves is, why would you want to use phone system with Microsoft Teams? And the way that I like to respond to that question is to simply say, if you are an organization that's using Microsoft Teams, you already have your chat capabilities that are there, you have your IM and presence that's there, you have team workflows and so forth. What using phone system does is it kind of is a natural step in that next progression to bring in your telephony solutions into Microsoft Teams. And by that I mean you'll be able to use the soft telephony client that is the very same one that you use when you have meetings and so forth in Teams, or you can use your desk phone to do phone calls to the PSTN. The other nice thing that this does for you is that it gives you these calling services that I've mentioned over here on the right-hand side of the slide. So you have PSTN access, plus you get some of these other features, like you can set up your own auto attendant if you want. You'll have call queues. You'll get the mid-call controls and so forth. Plus your voicemail, it is a text-to-speech, let me say a speech-to-text, and it can come in as an email if you're using Microsoft Teams. And so it's really convenient to kind of consolidate your communications and collaboration capabilities together and to sort of use Teams as a hub. But in order to do that, we have the Azure cloud where Office 365 lives and Microsoft Teams is in part of that. And then we have phone system, which is a part of Microsoft Teams. But there's 2 ways to connect Teams to a phone system or to the PSTN, and that is through calling plan and direct routing. And so let's talk about those for just a minute. So The first way is through calling plan, and this is a capability that's offered by Microsoft. You can actually sign up for calling plan through your Microsoft Teams administration portal, where you have the capability to choose and select other services and so forth. One of those is to do calling plan. And this is a service offered directly by Microsoft. It allows you to make phone calls directly from your Teams client. And this is actually the service that I happen to use with my Teams client. And so I use my Teams client for PSTN access. I do not have any other kind of PSTN access, I guess other than my cell phone. But just on my desk, I always use Teams. Now, calling plan has good availability, but I'll say it's limited. It's not available everywhere. And it's available in these countries that I've listed here at the bottom of the slide. One other point, typically calling plan is going to be used by smaller companies or maybe by those who have a number of discrete locations with small numbers of people at those locations. All right, let's move on now and talk about this second way of direct routing. So direct routing involves connecting a session border controller to a network connection that goes into the Azure cloud. And you can use MPLS, you can use just a standard internet, or you can use an SD-WAN kind of connectivity into the Azure cloud. And into that session border controller then are some carrier trunks that connect you into the PSTN. Now I need to make a few points about this border controller. So it requires a certified session border controller, and by that I mean this border controller has to be certified as one that works with Teams, and of course Microsoft helps get involved to do that. And as I build this slide, you can see that there are a lot of options available. There used to only be 3, but now you can see that it looks like there's 12 to 15 different kinds of session border controllers from a number of different companies that you can use. This session border controller, you can install it on your premises, or it can be installed in a service provider cloud, and the service provider can manage that session border controller for you. Now, one of the nice things that happens when you put in a session border controller, suppose that you're in a kind of a migration situation where you might have a PBX still. Well, some people might be migrating to Teams and some people may still be on the PBX. And so you can also hang a PBX off of this session border controller, and that will interface and interoperate in a sense with Microsoft Teams calling. The other nice thing that you can do, which we're going to talk about more later, is that you can also put a contact center in and connect that into the session border controller. And this is one of the ways that we're going to talk about integrating a contact center in with Microsoft Teams. Now let's compare a few costs. So if we look at calling plan and direct routing, these are some costs, and I'm going to give you the costs from Microsoft for calling plan, because as I mentioned, it is a solution that is offered by Microsoft. You are billed from Microsoft for calling plan. So the service that I have is the domestic calling plan, and it costs me $12 a month or $144 a year. It gives 3,000 minutes of access to the PSTN in the US and Canada. Now, if I had more people in my company, then you're able to pool those minutes so that if you have, say, 10 employees, then you get 30,000 minutes for your whole company. And so it's not like really you're going to run out. And I find that 3,000 minutes is really a lot. I never use that much, primarily because I'm using the other IP capabilities of Teams in meetings and so forth, and it's not really that much anymore that I go to the PSTN, although I do that probably at least once a day or more. Now, one of the things that I have kind of noticed is that the calling plan is a little bit expensive, and I'm going to show you some data from our sponsor. This is Netrix. So Netrix does have a direct routing offer, and you can see that there's multiple options here. So the basic one is $6 a month, and that gives you 200 minutes. And probably for me, that would be plenty. And probably for most of your users, that would be plenty. But there are other plans, as you can see. The enhanced plan gives you 2,000 minutes for $10. And so you can see that the plan from Microsoft is actually more expensive. Some other things that you can do with direct routing is you can actually connect in a SIP trunk. And again, Netrix, who's sponsoring the webinar today, does have SIP trunking. And with that one, you get a bundle of minutes, and then those can be separated out to whoever happens to be needing that SIP trunk. And you can share those minutes among everybody in your organization who's going to do that, or who is going to be using that shared SIP trunk. Now, one of the things I want to point out, just I happened to learn this as I was working with Matt and his team, is that with Netrix, if you happen to do direct routing, these phone numbers that you get, they have an automatic SMS capability with them, which is something that you don't get with calling plan. And so sometimes that can be helpful. And then, as I mentioned when I was talking about direct routing, the SBC can be hosted in the cloud by a service provider, and that is one of the capabilities that our sponsor Netrix does today. So that's all we're going to say about calling plan and direct routing, but we needed to lay that as a foundation before we talk about integrating the contact center. And I think, Eric, we have a polling slide if you'd be willing to come back on the line and introduce that poll to people.
Yes, we do, and I'll push that out to you right now. We'd like to ask you in the audience, has your organization deployed Microsoft Teams as your phone system? And options are no, we're happy with our current phone system. We haven't yet, but we're thinking about it. Yes, and we're using calling plan for the PSTN, or yes, and we're using direct routing for the PSTN. And I'll give you about a half a minute or a minute to answer that. And we just got some interesting data, I believe, yesterday from Microsoft about adoption of Teams generally and Microsoft phone system in particular. And Brent, if you picked up on that with the latest numbers on Teams.
Actually, Eric, I didn't see that because I was working on this webinar, and so if you happen to have those, that would be awesome if you could share them.
Sorry about that. They're up to, and I think they're changing the metric a little bit to like 250 million active users per month is the way I understand it, and up to 80 million phone system users.
That's remarkable.
Which is, I mean, we've seen tremendous growth. Of course, they compete with Zoom, and Zoom has seen great adoption of Zoom phone. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a testimony to how, there is still great demand for the telephony part of these, by a lot of users.
Yeah, absolutely. PSTN is still absolutely required for almost everybody. So do you have the results, Eric?
Yes, here they are. So you can see it's an interesting split there, and I'll leave that up and turn it back to you, Brent, and let you comment if you want, or move on.
Yeah, okay, that sounds great. So the interesting statistic here that really stands out to me is this green bar, the second one, that about a little over 40% haven't done it yet, but you're thinking about it. Well, I'll be, as a satisfied user, I have not had any problems using phone system and calling plan, at least. And so just I can give you that testimonial that I use it all the time. And we have, but it looks like we've got about 20% that are using either calling plan or direct routing. So that's excellent. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and continue. So now let's talk about adding contact center to Microsoft Teams. Now, as I did with phone system and needing a calling plan or direct routing, you can ask the question, well, why would I want to deploy an omnichannel contact center integrated with Microsoft Teams Voice? So on this slide, you can see that there's the elements of an omnichannel or a multi-channel contact center. Well, let's talk about that for just a minute. So if you integrate Teams Voice into your contact center, what I show on the left are some of the features or some of the benefits that you're going to get by doing that. And one of the assumptions here is that you would want to do that because you've probably rolled out Microsoft Teams to the rest of your organization. And so one of the big ones that may or may not really appear on this slide, but the idea is that you get a consistent communications hub or platform for everybody in your entire company. And it's not just communications, but then you get the other wonderful things that you get: the Active Directory, login and authentication, you get presence and instant messaging, you get the ability to use your Teams devices, phones, or your Teams client for PSTN capability and so forth. The other thing that I think would be really handy from a contact center point of view is sometimes there are people who are dedicated agents, and that's great, but sometimes there are people who are not agents per se, but they're subject matter experts, and that's what SME on this slide means, a subject matter expert. The idea being that, well, maybe on occasion you need to bring people into the call to do things, or they need to answer questions. And so you can just use the same mechanisms that everybody in the company is using to communicate with other people, but your contact center agents can do that. And so it's just this consistency, and it's this beautiful way of approaching communications from an organization-wide standpoint. Okay. Some of the other things, we're going to talk about these a little bit later, is this idea of notifications. And if you're using Teams, then you know how you get certain kinds of notifications and or pop-ups to tell you about interesting things. You can do the same thing from a contact center. You can get notifications from the contact center if you have it integrated in with Microsoft Teams. Now, besides that, as I've just put up on the right, there's all kinds of capabilities that the contact center still will provide you if it's integrated in with Microsoft Teams. For example, screen pops, the wall board, supervisor dashboard, all the kinds of things that you would normally expect in a contact center. And so you really don't lose functionality, but what you do is you gain capability by doing that integration. So let's talk about how you would do that. And there are 3 ways for integrating a contact center in with Microsoft Teams. The first of these is what Microsoft calls the Connect model. The second is the Extend model. And the third is the Power model. So let's address this idea of the Connect model. So the way Connect model works, if you remember when we talked about direct routing and how you have to have that SBC in the picture, well, one of the things that you can put on one side of that SBC is a contact center. And with the Connect model for integrating a contact center, you do that primarily via a SIP connection with the contact center connected into the SBC. And I'll show you a picture of how that works. Okay. As we mentioned before, this particular way to connect in does require the SBC, and it requires direct routing. You remember there were 2 ways to get PSTN into Microsoft Teams. Direct routing is one of the ways. Well, the Connect model to do the contact center integration requires direct routing. Now, calls are anchored in the SBC, and why that's important is because that allows some of the routing to happen. The contact center can tell the SBC where to route the call and so forth to the proper agent and so forth inside of Microsoft Teams. Then something that's important to point out, in this Connect model, the contact center is using the contact center's own queues, its own ACD, its own IVR, and those kinds of things. It is not using those capabilities that, there's queues and there's auto attendant and some other things that are available within inside Microsoft Teams phone system. It is not using those. It is actually using those capabilities from the contact center itself. And then, of course, the agents take their calls on the team client like we've talked about. So here's kind of how this would work, and I'm going to build this slide up to give you an example. And so at the top, we have the Azure Cloud where Teams lives, and I've also put there something called Graph API, and I'll explain what Graph API is. Basically, what it does is there's an integration from the contact center via this API called Graph API that allows the contact center to get some Active Directory information, and then with that Active Directory information, it can pull the presence information from Microsoft Teams. So in a contact center, you kind of need to know the state that your agent is in. For example, is the agent in a call? Is the agent on break? Is the agent off to lunch, or doing post-call work or something like that? And you need to know that state so that you can route the call to the agent properly. And so the contact center integrates in with Azure Active Directory and with Microsoft Teams Presence via this Graph API. So let's see how this would work. A customer calls in from the PSTN. That call is probably an 800 number. It goes into the Microsoft certified SBC. That's the first step. The SBC then knows, okay, this is a contact center call, so it uses SIP and it routes that call into the contact center. The contact center does its processing with the call. It'll play prompts, it'll do, put the caller into queues and all those kinds of things that the contact center normally would do. Once the contact center has, once the user has gone through the contact center and has decided which agent is supposed to take the call, then there's signaling sent back to the SBC, and the SBC then signals up to Microsoft Teams phone system, and phone system then connects the call into the agent. And so that's how this connect model actually works with integrating into Microsoft Teams. And of course, you can add as many agents as you would normally have in a contact center. It's not limited in any means at all. Okay. So I want to point out that the connect model for integrating contact centers is how all of the contact center providers integrate in with Microsoft Teams. Those that have these integrations, they do that using the connect model, except for one, and we're going to talk about that here in just a minute. But what I'm showing you on the screen is actually the contact center from Netrix, and so I'm just going to point out a few of the things that are important so that you'll understand the capabilities that you get. So first, essentially, when you do this integration via the Connect model, what you see is the regular Teams interface like I'm showing you here, but this interface for the contact center is actually a web page. And so whatever the contact center vendor chooses to put on this web page to populate the web page with, that's the interface that you're going to get when you're using the contact center within Microsoft Teams. A few other things that you can do, you can choose where to take the call. So if, for example, you've got your Teams client, you can see at the bottom, you can take the call on Teams. Or if you have a hard phone from some other, PBX or something like that, you can do that as well. Effectively, you can choose where you take the call. Some other capabilities, you've got the typical agent wallboard, and you can see the multimedia cues here. You can see presence information from not only other agents, but you can put anybody in your company that you might need to have presence information for. And then, you can have those kinds of conversations and so forth. Just a couple of other things that I'd like to point out. If you look over on what we call the left rail, and that's this very far left portion of the screen here that I'm circling, you can see that the contact center actually just shows up as another icon on the left rail. And so when you're as an agent or if you're as a supervisor or whatever, you want to use the contact center, you just use the same Teams interface that you would normally use, and you just click on that button on the left rail. A few other interesting things that you get, if you look up here at the top, and I'm going to do a circle here around, it says SMS or chat or so forth. One of the beautiful things that you can do here is that from this same interface, you can see these tabs that they call them. You can actually respond in a multi-channel fashion right from your Teams interface. So if you have somebody that's contacting your contact center via SMS or via web chat or so forth, you can respond to those in the same interface that you would normally use for Microsoft Teams. This is just another example of what the contact center can look like, and you're seeing there's queues, there's customer history. On the right, there's call wrap-up, disposition, comments, and those kinds of things. And the point I want to make is you get all the functionality that you would normally expect in a contact center because it is the contact center. And what the capability you get here is what the particular contact center vendor surfaces through their web interface. And this is just another example showing a supervisor dashboard and some queue visibility. And the second one here, you can do some assignments of agents and so forth, just like you normally would with any other kind of contact center interface. All right, So as I mentioned, the capabilities that you're going to get when you integrate a contact center in via the Connect model is going to be whatever the vendor that you happen to choose surfaces through that web interface, and that's important for you to know. So as you're looking at a contact center vendor, you're going to want to look at that web interface that they happen to have. Let's shift gears just a little bit now. Let's look at the second way to integrate in a contact center with Microsoft Teams. This is called the Extend model. And so I've put some of the differences in red on this slide. So you can use calling plan, or you can use direct routing. So this one, it doesn't require direct routing. You can use either one. The contact center here, it's built within Microsoft Teams natively and within Azure. When I say natively, really you're using APIs and those kinds of things, but you're using the capabilities of phone system, and you're using some of the APIs into Microsoft Azure and so forth. Now, calls, unlike the previous example of the Connect model where calls were anchored in the SBC, these calls are anchored in Microsoft Teams phone system. So this is really a native integration with Teams. The contact center uses Microsoft Teams routing and so forth to handle the calls and to get those calls to the agents and so forth. Then, as with the other model, agents then take their calls using the Microsoft Teams client. So let's look in a little bit more detail about how this would work. So as you can see on this particular diagram that I'm showing, you can use either method to connect the PSTN into Microsoft Teams, direct routing or the calling plan. And then there's some additional APIs that you're going to use. The earlier model I mentioned, the Graph API, well, there's two other models here, two other APIs that you're going to use. One is the Teams client, and the other is the Cloud Communications APIs to do some of the interesting signaling and so forth that you need with this particular Extend model for integrating the contact center. Now, as I mentioned, the Extend model allows a contact center developer to create the contact center right within Teams and Azure. And as I'm showing in this slide, you're using the Teams calling APIs, so you play the prompts right from Microsoft Teams. The music on hold comes from Microsoft Teams. Agent alerts. This is a native integration. Okay. The other thing that that is done is within Azure, there's this thing called kind of a contact center service, and the idea being that you still need to have some capabilities, some contact center functionality that is going to live with your contact center, and that's going to be done with Azure. And there's a queuing service that this particular vendor, there's only one company actually that does this, and you know, that's a company called Landis Technologies that does this kind of integration. But there's a recording service up in Azure and so forth. So, but this is using the native Teams implementation for contact center integration. And as I mentioned, there's only one company that does this. So why aren't there more companies that have used this model? Well, the reason for that is because the Teams client APIs, that would be the interface that you would see. Right now, that's still kind of limited, and some of the Azure, the more deeper communications functions are still a little bit limited. And so that's why I think we don't have more companies that are doing this. But as I show you in this particular slide here, you get some awesome capabilities from a contact center that's integrated this way. As you see on the left rail, you see the contact center is, again, one of those icons that you can go into and use just like you would with any other Microsoft Teams capability. And using that Teams API, you can have some interesting interface capabilities. So I think what will happen as Microsoft does more on the Teams client API and so forth, I think we're going to see more companies that are going to use this Extend model to integrate in with Microsoft Teams. That's just a prediction, but we'll see what really happens. Okay, let's talk about the third model. And honestly, there's not really much to talk about because Microsoft says this model, this power model, is not going to be available until the end of the year. And so what this model does, you can think of it as a platform as a service kind of model. And so it more closely resembles what you would do if you were building a contact center using, say, Amazon Connect, or if you were using, say, the Twilio platform. So that's going to be ready at the end of the year, and it'll be interesting to see the capabilities that Microsoft surfaces in the Power model for integrating the contact center. And I think I have just one more slide, and that is the contact center integration with Microsoft Teams recap. You get a consistent communications platform. Agents can use the same collaboration tools that everybody else in the company does. Agents can see IM and presence. Subject matter experts can easily be added to a call or a message. You can transfer a call to them. You have a consistent notification mechanism across your company, and you can use notifications channels as pop-ups. We didn't really talk about that, but if your contact center logic, say you have a KPI or something that's out of whack a little bit, you can send notifications to that can pop up to somebody, or you can send them into Microsoft Teams channels, and it's really kind of cool to be able to do that. And then from those channels, you have all kinds of other integrations that you can do to do some process workflows and so forth. So I think with that, Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you for a second polling question.
Sorry about that. It was on mute. Thanks very much, Brent. Terrific presentation. Great to get all that detail. Here's the question we'd like to ask you in the audience. Are you considering integrating your company's contact center with Teams? Have you determined that they'll stay separate at this stage? You're determined. Are you exploring your options, and you might consider changing to a different contact center platform so that you can integrate Teams? Are you exploring integrating options, but you wouldn't move off your current contact center platform if that's what you had to do? Or have you already integrated your contact center with Teams? So I want to bring Matt in. Matt's going to talk to us in just a minute, and maybe kind of ask you, Matt, what is Netrix seeing in the way of, there's been a lot, notice obviously, and people talking about, Microsoft doesn't have a contact center platform of its own the way a Cisco does or whoever. Are you seeing, in Netrix's world that this is starting to kind of come to the surface more as a thing that people are wanting to find a way to address?
Absolutely. I think it was actually funny, the earlier polling question kind of validated kind of what we're seeing too. I think the progression, at least we see it on kind of our customer bases, obviously, when the pandemic hit, there were a lot of people that rapidly moved to Teams, right? For basic meetings, for chat, for collaboration. And that was kind of wave one, if you will. Wave two, which probably started maybe, 6 or 9 months ago, once folks kind of got comfortable with some of that capability, people naturally started asking about voice, right? How can I begin to replace my PBX with Teams as well? And now it's kind of just snowballing to say, okay, what else can I do? What else can I do? And for organizations that have either, a full-blown contact center, or more and more organizations are kind of in that hybrid space where kind of what Brent was saying, they don't necessarily have classic agents, but they have folks that all have customer service responsibilities that may not be always in the quote unquote contact center application, that this really provides a nice way of either scaling or pulling in SMEs to a customer engagement. And so we're having a lot of our customers that have kind of gone through that progression are now really looking at how to integrate Teams into their contact center. So we're in conversations daily about these particular use cases.
Okay, great. Definitely not surprising, but very interesting. Here's the results from our survey. I'll just turn it over to you, Matt. And again, if you want to comment on these and then finish it up here or go through your slides.
Yeah, I can take it from here. But no, I think this is interesting. Kind of 52% is I think actually a little bit higher than I would have anticipated. But again, given the topic of the webinar, I guess that shouldn't be surprising. So yeah, this aligns to it. There's a lot of organizations that are exploring, integration options. and even looking to potentially even look to replace their existing contact center, which that is not a small decision to make to replace your contact center. But if it does give you some of these capabilities to be able to extend into the Teams platform, I think this speaks to the fact that a lot of organizations just see the power and the benefit of being able to truly transform the way they deliver customer service by having this integration. So I think these numbers are telling. It's very interesting. Okay. Let me jump. So, first and kind of foremost, I want to kind of thank Brent and Eric for, a very informative webinar. And given the number of attendees that I see kind of on today, it's definitely a topic that is resonating with many organizations. Real quick, just want to spend a little bit of time talking, maybe bragging a little bit about Netrix. So Netrix is an award-winning provider of cloud collaboration, security, and managed services. We're a rapidly growing organization now with over 600 employees with presence across the U.S. and internationally. We've been in the communication and collaboration space for decades, really helping organizations deploy this technology. But we also have kind of resources and infrastructure, including a 24/7 kind of cloud management center that really allows us to also manage this technology for our customers. So really they can focus in on, their growing their business. As I mentioned, we have presence globally, kind of as represented by the countries in orange, but we can service customers all over the world. So as our customers grow, we continue to expand our capabilities to be able to deliver kind of the best possible service that we can. We are a Microsoft Gold partner with numerous competencies, and candidly, I could probably spend another 10 minutes talking about all of the accolades. But one that we are pretty excited about was at the most recent Microsoft Inspire conference. Netrix was actually recognized in Satya's presentation as one of the key partners helping organizations transform how they work. So that was really, really kind of nice to see, and got us excited. So let's see if I can get this to work, but we're right there. A little hard to see, but that's our logo on that presentation, which again for us was really, really exciting. Kind of keeping on the transformation theme, this is a slightly more detailed list of how we help organizations kind of transform through innovation and technology. And while we can deliver on each of these kind of boxes independently, the strength for Netrix is our ability to kind of stitch solutions together that kind of cross over. It's difficult to talk about collaboration without cloud. It's difficult to talk about cloud without talking about security. And so our ability to bring all of these facets into a solution is really why I would say our customers work with us, time and time again. Okay. Finally, let's talk about Microsoft Teams. We've been really busy helping organizations, kind of maximize their investment in Microsoft Teams. And I kind of started talking about this, but, regardless of where an organization is in their journey with Teams, there's ways that we can help. For organizations that are really just kind of looking at starting off, we have ideation services and design services and governance and migration services, just so folks in organizations can help to kind of put some structure in place before they really, invest in a collaboration or a UC or a CC solutions. For organizations that are maybe a little bit further down the path that are really looking at exploring voice, which I think it seems like a good number of the folks on this call are, Brent did a really nice job of explaining kind of our kind of unique direct routing solution, as well as our own contact center that integrates with Teams, as well as our ability to integrate third-party contact center solutions as well. And then finally, for organizations that are really looking to embrace the power of Teams, we have a dedicated development team here at Netrix that understands how to extend the reach of Teams, with the Power Platform and Brent stole my thunder, even newer technologies like Azure Communication Services. It really does allow you to kind of extend the capabilities of Teams. And when you talk about kind of deeper integrations with applications, we get a lot of companies that want to maybe integrate ServiceNow with Microsoft Teams or something like Workday. And the classic implementation is more, you can look at that canvas that we saw in terms of how do I surface something like ServiceNow into that canvas. But the deeper integrations are more around kind of micro experiences, right? I don't want to go into ServiceNow and navigate. I just want status on my ticket. And so can I invoke a bot within Teams, type in my service number, and basically get some data back from the bot to say, here's where it is, and here's where it is in the queue. Those kind of micro experiences are what really is exciting that people are building now to really, again, further not only integrate Teams with something like a contact center, but now with all of your line of business applications. So data, regardless of what system it lives within an organization, is really, basically a click or two away without having to lose Teams. So in a big nutshell, we are kind of a comprehensive Microsoft as well as a very serious kind of Microsoft Teams partner. And again, definitely appreciate everyone's time today, as well as, Brent putting together the really, really good material that we saw. So I believe that brings us to the end of our scheduled content.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much, Matt. And again, thanks, Brent, for the great presentation that you have. We do have some time for questions. We've got several in here, and of course, welcome you all sending more of them to us. So let's start out with a question, and maybe I'll start this with Brent. This person is asking, my understanding is that some CCaaS solutions, contact center as service, don't require an SBC for direct routing. Do you have any information about whether that's the case?
The one that we talked about that uses the extend model, that does not require that SBC. Most of the rest of them use that connect model. If there is one that's like that, then I'm not familiar with it. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. It's just I don't know about it. And so if there is something like that exists, I'd be grateful if you would ping me and send me some details just so that I can, become better educated. So that would be my response, Eric. I don't know if it really does it or not, but from what I read from Microsoft, most everybody uses an SBC. I won't say everybody does, but most everybody.
Yeah, the only thing I could chime in, and I wish I had my architect here to correct me, when you look at contact center, you do have different channels, right? You do have maybe a chat channel or a messaging channel. My perspective would be once you get into that voice channel, I would say it's safe to say that most solutions require the SBCs, but that's maybe the only little nuance that I can think of there.
All right. Now we have a question about the power model, which both of you, I think, highlighted really well. And someone's asking if it'll be as powerful as Twilio, and I guess maybe the way to kind of frame that for you is just if you've been looking at Twilio or at that model, are you expecting to see essentially a competitive offer, a viable competitor from Microsoft? Brent, you mentioned it's kind of we're looking to the end of the year. Is it that soon people would be able to consider it, or would be looking into next year? Or
and Brent, correct me if you think others. Azure Communication Services really is that response from Microsoft for Twilio, right? It really is now the ability to kind of have developers and building blocks build, some of kind of what we are very familiar with Twilio, you'll now be able to do with Azure Communication Services. It is relatively new, but we are already sandboxing it, playing with it, and it's powerful out of the box. And I think that they are just going to continue to invest in that platform. So we as an organization are continuing to get all of our developers up to speed on Azure Communication Services, because we think that's going to be the next wave of how organizations truly do extend, voice and collaboration into, third-party applications, or really build some really neat experiences with their customers using something like Azure Communication Services.
Yeah, that's a great response, Matt. And I don't have the hands-on like your company does and your team does. My sense is that Microsoft typically has time, and that ultimately, if it's not right when it first comes out, if it doesn't have everything, well, they have time and they'll work on it and they'll get it right. They typically do that over time, and so it'll be interesting to see what they really come out with, and how well the first version competes with Twilio and Connect, Amazon Connect.
Yep. No, agreed.
Is that, we hear about Microsoft not having a CCaaS platform or its own native contact center. Would that power model be a viable way for at least a certain profile of enterprise to be able to kind of have everything in a Microsoft context, so that they don't have to confront whether there's a Microsoft platform for contact center?
Theoretically, yes. I mean, you have to really understand kind of the use cases. I mean, contact center solutions are fairly complex applications. Not to say that you couldn't use tools like that to kind of stitch together or build together an application like that. Theoretically, yes. But again, it would come down to how sophisticated of a contact center are you looking to build.
We have a question, and Matt, you highlighted, of course, Netrix's close relationship with Microsoft and the results of that. Do you do any integration work with any other vendors' products, and do you try to help customers maybe integrate that into a solution where it at least has some Teams in it?
Yeah, we're from Netrix's perspective, we have a we're a significant Microsoft partner, but our kind of UCaaS capabilities has always been kind of multi-vendor, whether it be Cisco, Avaya. Kind of our pedigree actually goes back to include a multitude of vendors. So when it comes to integrations with any platform out there, I think that's really where we shine, because we do have that expertise within house to be able to, if organizations have fairly unique use cases they're trying to solve, that's usually where Netrix shines. So we are not by any means limited to just the Microsoft stack.
I wonder if, we kind of rushed by and had to rush by the poll slide where we saw that really significant number of folks suggesting that, 52%, I think, suggesting that they might even consider changing contact center vendors in order to be able to do this integration. I wonder if I could just toss it out to each of you. What do you make of that particular result?
Like I think I had mentioned, I think it just speaks to the potential and the power of being able to integrate kind of your collaboration platform with your contact center. And I think historically those two things have been looked at as different, right? That you kind of have folks that are responsible for the contact center, you have folks that are responsible for kind of the UC environment and the collaboration environment, and those have always kind of been separate. And I think people are realizing that by bringing those closer together, it opens up a whole bunch of doors in terms of how to rethink customer service. And, again, looks like organizations are willing to explore that if they can potentially get some of these capabilities.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. And I would just add that I was really surprised, Eric, by the number who were willing to change a contact center in order to get this integration. I was not expecting that number to be that high. I was expecting it maybe to be 10 or 15%, because a contact center investment is, it's a lot of work to set these up. And if someone were to change, it's a lot of work. But the thing that was interesting is that it sounds like companies are willing to exchange that work in order to have a more tightly integrated environment. And we talked about the benefits of that environment. So that's just colored me a little surprised, but I'm really thrilled by that. That's awesome news.
Yeah, the other thing I can think of, and again, I don't know what contact centers people are on today, but the last 2 years has completely changed the way organizations use things like SMS and messaging, right? And when I go to the dentist now, there's an SMS exchange that happens before I show up within the office. And so I think a lot of organizations are beginning to explore using some of these other channels, whether it be social, SMS, chat, as a customer service kind of channel. And that may be that we're beginning to expose maybe some of the limitations of some of the contact centers that people are on today, where maybe it's very voice channel. But the more these other channels become more expected by customers, I think folks are beginning to look at their contact center with kind of a fresh set of eyes. And if you're going to make that change and you've invested in Microsoft Teams, I think it's just a natural progression to say, how do we bring these two things together?
Got it. Okay, we have a question. How does CRM integration and also vertical applications, they mentioned electronic medical records, factor in with Teams and Contact Center? Where does that integration happen?
I guess the unfortunate question is depends. CRM integration within Contact Center, I think, is fairly expected these days. If you look at something like Salesforce, being able to do, screen pops as calls come in, those sorts of things, I think that's been, fairly standard. Within Teams, again, depending on the application, Teams allows you with APIs and integrations to kind of have a similar experience to be able to, again, invoke data and information from other systems. So, definitely Salesforce is kind of an obvious example of that. But, with looking at Microsoft Teams as a platform, again, we'd have to dig into the specific applications, but, there's a lot of integrations that you can do to do things like screen pops.
Yeah, and as I was in thinking about that question, it seems like there's a couple of ways to do an integration like that. And so Microsoft, if you just click on the apps icon on the left rail, then you'll see a ton of kind of integrations that are there. I won't say all of those are very deep. In fact, probably most of them are not very deep. And so if you want to do a deeper integration with anything like WFO or medical records or any of these other kinds of applications, these workflow applications, then of course you'd need to have a deeper integration capability and use some of the deeper APIs. And of course Matt and his team are able to to help you do that.
And just to put it out there, and when we do kind of some of our governance workshops, when organizations are exploring that, now when you talk about integrations, talk about accessing data, the kind of the governance around now that you're potentially extending data into different pockets and different windows. How do you make sure that, again, you're doing that, in a smart way? And so a lot of what we do with our governance offerings are, okay, you want to do this, you want to, again, begin to do integration, screen pops. Let's make sure we identify, all the rules of the road we need to set, before we start kind of building those bridges, if you will.
Well, and that's particularly critical for medical records and, HIPAA kind of compliance and all that kind of stuff, because once you're starting to surface that, in I'll say a different environment, the governance is critical, and doing the planning and just making sure that the system is going to maintain the compliance that you need with all the regulations, whether it's HIPAA or whether it's the financial regulations or whatever.
Okay, and we've got time for about one more question, I think. Somebody's asking, what kind of challenges do you see when a customer is also using a WFO solution?
Are we talking about workforce optimization? So
Yeah.
I don't know challenges. I mean, I know when we do I'm just thinking some of our customers in our projects, it's not uncommon to have kind of a third-party solution into the mix. I can't speak to any challenges that jump out to mind. Brent, I don't know if you can think of any.
There's nothing coming to mind out of the ordinary integration kinds of challenges that I'm aware of. This might be a contact center. WFO often works with contact center, those kinds of integrations, but I'm not familiar with any specific challenges that one would see with integrating into Microsoft Teams, unless there's some integration issues. I'm unfamiliar with those, though.
The only thing I could maybe speak to, and again, my architects may slap me upside the head because there is a solution there. We talk about kind of that extending the idea of I can pull in a SME that may be on Teams. I would assume that most standard, workforce automation or workforce management tools would still be more restricted to the agents themselves and being able to, schedule and those sorts of things. I don't necessarily know that I've seen it being able to kind of go out and say, okay, you've got this many Teams SMEs available. Do you need to somehow, factor them in as well? But you've invoked my curiosity to go back to talk to my team and see if what they're hearing out there.
All right, and one final question, and maybe I'll just direct this to Matt. I know Brent is doing some comparisons of Teams and Zoom for Enterprise Connect. So maybe just quickly to Matt. I mentioned earlier, Zoom is very much competing now, and they've got Zoom Phone and all that. What are the factors that you're seeing customers when they opt for Teams that they probably got some Zoom in their network from the pandemic at least, but what kind of pushes them over to Teams?
I think a lot of what we've talked about today, right? Even when you look at kind of Zoom and the potential or inevitable kind of partnership with Five9, there's a race to to own as many of the user interactions as you possibly can, right? And so the idea of not only UC but CC, owning both of those experiences together, and then when you do look at some of the potential integrations, I really do think that's where Teams really is a little bit ahead, right? When you talk about the Power Platform, when you talk about Azure Communication Services, to begin to now integrate not only UC and CC capabilities, but automation and workflows and using things like Microsoft, Teams bots, those become game changers in terms of really being able to design some fairly sophisticated solutions for an organization, all using Teams as a platform, right? You're not kind of pulling things together. So I think any organization that may have already invested in Teams or Microsoft from a licensing perspective that truly wants to use Teams as a platform, those are the ones that we typically see kind of say, I get it that there's a whole lot of Teams that I'm not using today. And by really leveraging all the facets of it as a platform, it now really begins to make sense for me to kind of, really continue investing on the Teams platform. And that tends to be where we see kind of the no-brainer decision, if you will.
Got it. All right. Well, thank you very much again, Brent and Matt. Just a really great, very timely hour, and really appreciate your time. And of course, we appreciate you in the audience spending the hour with us, and Netrix for sponsoring this webinar. In the next 24 hours, you in the audience are going to receive a personalized follow-up email that will have details with a link to the presentation on demand. Please do forward that to anybody who wasn't able to attend or sign up, who you think would get something out of this, and tell them what a great event it was. This webinar is copyright by Informa. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Enterprise Connect and Netrix, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. So on behalf of our guests, I'm Eric Kraft. Thanks for your time and have a great day.
Thank you.